Did Kyle Pitts do enough in week 5 to solidify himself as an elite tight end one for the rest of the fantasy football season? That and much more coming up in today's episode of the Launchpad. And Pat, I'll start with you. Do you think that Kyle Pitts is in that weekly discussion now as an elite tight end one?
I think he is, Dave, but I do want to see what happens when he shares the field with Calvin Ridley, coming off the game where Ridley was scratched for personal reasons in England, and now he's going to be back. And I think Russell Gage is going to be back too. Not that he's going to be a big factor, but I'm really excited about Pitts. The usage is great. I mean, they just don't use him as an inline blocker very much at all. He's in the slot or he's lined up outside, or like they want him to be running routes, and he is just such a tough matchup. Too big, too fast for whoever's taking him usually. So really excited about him, but the Ridley thing and the target distribution is going to be interesting.
And you love to see that, when players are out, for a guy like Kyle Pitts to step up and look absolutely dominant, because that's what he did in that London game. He looked phenomenal. But like you said, there's some concern now. So, Victoria, same question to you before we get into introductions. How are you feeling about Kyle Pitts? Is he somebody that you're putting up in that elite tier this week?
I think so. I definitely this week will certainly show if his performance from week 5 changed the coaches' minds in terms of getting him more involved. I think he certainly played his way to a larger piece of the pie, to a larger target share moving forward. He absolutely dominated in that game, like you already said. It was a huge reason why they won. He made some big time plays and high pressure situations, coming down with the football there in the fourth quarter. That was just awesome to finally watch him succeed and have a big outing. He's been hovering around, I think, 75% of snaps, so he should see some more work going forward. 9 targets week 4, I think 10 targets in week 5. So he's pointing up, but yes, we need to see how that target share looks with Ridley and Gage back in the lineup.
Yeah, and Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley, they haven't really been able to get on the same page so far this year. So there's an opportunity for Kyle Pitts to even step up and become the number 1 weapon on that offense, which, people that took a risk drafting a rookie tight end in those middle rounds in fantasy football would absolutely love to see him take on that role. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning into episode 20 now of the Launchpad. It is going by quick. I took last week off because I was traveling, but 2 weeks ago, I had Jamie Eisenberg with CBS and Jessica Gridiron with FanDuel on here, and we talked about some week 5 matchups, and now we are on to week 7. Got 2 great guests with me today, and first I want to introduce Pat Fitzmaurice, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction. He has taken on the primer over at Fantasy Pros. You probably know him from seeing his name way up atop of those accuracy rankings every single year at Fantasy Pros. Also over at the Football Girl. Pat, you're doing a ton. Why don't you go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you've got going on this season?
Oh, thanks, Dave. They can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. I've got a weekly podcast, Fitz on Fantasy, out every Tuesday morning. And you can find me, as mentioned, at Fantasy Pros. And my rankings are also up at footballgirl.com. And Dave, where were you traveling last week?
I was in Chicago. All right. Go ahead. We're not Pat. I know. So Pat's a Packers fan. As you can see behind me, I am a very diehard Bears fan. I was home for the game, and go ahead. Get it over.
I just had to check. That's okay, Dave, because Aaron Rodgers really said it all, so I don't need to add anything to that.
Yeah. I mean, I've made a career. I mean, my entire life, I've just watched Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers just throttle us every single season. So nothing that I'm not used to already. But I was actually on Pat's show last week, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. We had a fun podcast where we talked about the history of that Bears-Packers rivalry. Had a really, really good time. And then speaking of that podcast, you actually had our good friend Troy King on this week. So I haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, but I am excited. And now looping this all together, Troy King is a very good friend of mine, one of my co-hosts on the Football Guys Mailbag Show. And the other co-host is down at the bottom of the screen, Victoria Geary, who has just blown up in this industry, like a blossoming star right before our eyes. Absolutely love to see all the opportunities that you've been getting lately, because you deserve every single one of them. One of my associates over at Football Guys. She's also over at Ball Blast. Victoria, let everyone know where they can find you and what you've got going on. I know you've got a show this weekend that you'll be doing at Yahoo. You were just with Justin Boone yesterday. You are all over the place lately.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at FFB_Victoria. Of course, putting out some work with football guys. Just having an absolute blast this season on the Mailbag Show with Dave and Troy every Wednesday, 7:30, co-hosting that. Yes, I was just on with Justin Boone on his podcast yesterday for this week's matches. That was a blast. Definitely check that out. And yeah, I'm doing a small segment on Yahoo Fantasy Football Live this Sunday.
Definitely recommend following Victoria. She is a very fun follow on Twitter. Like I said, a little bit newer in the industry, but she is blowing up right now. So check out what she's doing. Also, one of the best writers in the industry. Your articles are incredible, Victoria. So keep it up. Can't wait to see where you go. But anyway, we have a ton of football to talk about. We got a game kicking off in just a few hours, but let's rewind and go back to that Atlanta game that we previewed a little bit. They're playing at Miami this week. The Falcons are 2-point favorites, and we've got an over-under of 47.5. So nothing too high scoring from this game. We already talked about Kyle Pitts, but I want to talk about Cordaro Patterson just a bit, because last time we saw him, his snap count was much higher than we had seen in the first few weeks. And that's what we really wanted to see. Unfortunately, the touchdowns didn't come there, but the usage was there. So, Victoria, in this matchup against Miami, how are you ranking Cordaro Patterson? Where do you expect him to kind of finish this week?
I don't see how you can't have him top 10. He's never going to get you that crushing game on the ground. He's not very efficient on the ground, but his value comes through the air and through his targets. So I just love that. We talked about throughout the offseason this argument of talent versus opportunity, and roping that in with Mike Davis. He's got the opportunity, but can he fend off someone maybe a little more talented in that backfield? And we see Cordaro Patterson just hopping in and becoming this. Who would have thought we're talking about Cordaro Patterson at this stage of the season? He has just been his snap counts though. They're creeping up slightly, and of course, like we already said, we saw Kyle Pitts get more targets. Obviously, Cordaro Patterson more involved without Ridley engaged in week 5, but Mike Davis is not going away. He's still playing around 60 to 65% of the snaps. He's still an every week low end RB2 that you hope gets in the end zone. But Cordaro Patterson, I don't see, you got to have him top 10 this week. He continues to just keep crushing it, and he's a favorite target for Matt Ryan.
I like it. And top 10 is a lofty ranking, but it's tough to argue against, because if he does what he did in the first few weeks with the increased usage, I'm with it. So I'm not going to keep asking all you guys the same question, or the show would go on way longer. But Pat, I do want to get your take on Cordaro Patterson at all, because he has to be one of the most polarizing players in fantasy football right now. How are you feeling about him this week against Miami?
Pretty good. Running back 7 and then wide receiver 13 for people who only have wide receiver eligibility for him. Victoria brought up the snap count, which, he was doing a lot with a little and getting touches, either carries or targets on like half of his snaps, which seemed like it was maybe not quite sustainable. But then they sort of really leaned into his usage in the England game and bumped up the snap count, which is good, because, he is just such a tough mismatch. And man, they play chess in Atlanta with the Pitts, Cordaro Patterson combo, because Patterson's another guy we've seen him line up in the backfield in the slot out wide. One of his touchdowns this year was just lining up as an outside receiver, running a post pattern and beating his man. So, really kind of just fun for Arthur Smith to play around with those two guys and see what he can do. So, yeah, especially, we know how bleak the landscape is at running back this week. So, if you got Cordaro Patterson, you're pretty excited about it.
And he's one of those players that, like, anybody that's watched football for the last decade, you can't watch Cordaro Patterson and not love him. He's just such a fun player. Like, he can really do it all. He's strong, he's fast, he's big. And I feel like, he was on the Bears, and last year when Tariq Owen went down, everybody was saying, well, cool, now Cordaro Patterson gets to step up, and no coach has ever really trusted him with a big role. Here Arthur Smith is finally doing it in year 9, and it is a ton of fun to see. So hoping that he can keep this up. And I love that you guys are both very bullish on your rankings this week. And then something that doesn't even get discussed is if he does have that dual eligibility, that just makes him that much more valuable. So even if you're valuing him as, a top 15 running back, the dual eligibility almost moves him up a few spots during these bye weeks, just because you have so much more freedom and liberty with where you can put him in those lineups. Anyway, let's go on and talk about the Miami Dolphins a little bit. And I want to talk about Jalen Waddle, because right now everybody is justifiably going crazy over Jamar Chase and Kadarius Toney, who are really flashing. But Jalen Waddle is really quietly putting together a very, very efficient rookie season. So, Pat, I want to ask you, I had Jalen Waddle in my top 20 last week. Is he somebody that you are comfortable consistently ranking as a top 20 receiver?
I don't think consistently. I believe I have him right around wide receiver 20 or wide receiver 19 this week. And the only reason why is what's going to happen when it's both Javonte Parker and Will Fuller coming back to join him, the three receivers, and Mike Gesicki's been getting a pretty good target share there. So kind of an interesting situation. Plus, I'm not feeling great about Miami overall going forward. And, apologies to Troy King for saying this, big time Dolphins fan, but, openly letting these Tua rumors bubble up, not taking the bye after a week in England. I mean, they're going to get killed. Like, I got the show sheet and that was a reminder like, oh yeah, I've got to bet on Atlanta this week. Cause like, I have no doubt in my mind that Miami's going to be really flat, like playing again 7 days after coming back from the other side of the Atlantic. So it just seems like things are not going to go well for Miami down the stretch. And I'd generally rather have players on teams that, are functional. Waddle's an exciting talent, though, no question. Great dynasty assets. And I think he'll have his weeks this year, but we still haven't seen him top 70 yards. I think that's as high on the season. And, it's exciting. I'd like to see him do a little more than just be used as a short area receiver, especially with the sort of speed that can just totally lift the lid. I like him, but I don't think he's going to be a consistent wide receiver too for me in the rankings.
And see, I do kind of like his skill set matched up with Tua because Tua's a guy that doesn't really throw the ball that far down the field. So he's kind of Jalen Waddle's almost taken on the role that we wanted Laviska Shenault to have. Completely different team, but just catching those little pop screens and slants and then racking up some yards after the catch. So I think that there is some concern with the other guys coming back, but Waddle's done enough, I think, to really justify a pretty good target share there. But let me ask you about that because Devontae Parker is coming back this week. So, Victoria, are you confident plugging Devontae Parker in, or is Waddle really the only guy that you should be interested in this passing game? And Mike Gesicki, of course.
I think with the matchup being Atlanta, I think because of that matchup, I would put him in my lineup. I know he's not crushed you in your lineup when he's been healthy this year, no less than 8 PPR points. And with all the bye week players and all the injuries, he certainly is worth a flex in this game. It just if he's coming back, as Pat already mentioned, and you mentioned where these targets going to end up if everyone starts to become healthy. I do like Waddle as well this week. I like all the pass catchers. I hope they don't come out flat because I'm thinking Tua. I want to see Tua have a good performance. I want to see him silence these haters and these rumors. And the kid's not even played enough games to start for a whole season, and he's just getting
11 games, right? I think he's got
11 games. I'm so sick of hearing it. He's got to just be sick of hearing it too. I understand it's a business and all that, but I hope he comes out just guns blazing this weekend, to be honest.
Yeah, so we've got two, there's a lot of fantasy implications in that game, but nobody's getting too excited about, the Falcons and the Dolphins. But I think what I've got pegged as the game of the week, Kansas City Chiefs in Tennessee playing against the Titans. The Chiefs are favorites here, but the spread is pretty skinny. It's just 4.5 points, but really the over under here. When I put the sheet together yesterday, I was at 56.5. I checked on another website today and it moved up to 58. So people are expecting this game to be an absolute blowout, and I can't wait for it. We know that we're plugging in Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. I don't want to talk about those guys because we know what we're doing. But Mecole Hardman, he's had 5+ targets in half of his games this season, including 17 targets over the last 2 weeks. So, Victoria, I'll ask you first. Are you confident plugging Mecole Hardman in your lineup, or is that just crazy talk?
Oh, goodness. I don't think I will ever feel confident plugging Mecole Hardman in my lineup. He's one of those guys that I put in the same bucket as like a Brian Edwards. Everyone's saying they're going to the moon this year. We don't. I like to say we don't even know if they're gonna go and make it to Wendy's. We don't know. And Mecole Hardman is one of those guys I just feel very gross slotting him in there. If I absolutely had to, I'm in a pinch, I'm doing it. But there's other guys this week. Even Devontae Parker, Jalen Waddle, we've already mentioned. Even somebody like Henry Ruggs been getting more targets, more snap share over the last few weeks. Tim Patrick continues to be disrespected every single week and week out. How is he still on waiver wires? I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. I feel like I would put those guys in my lineup over Hardman, and that sounds wild, But the wide receiver too for the Chiefs it could be anyone on any given week. So it's very hard to predict.
Yeah. And I think, if you've got Hardman, you didn't draft him just to stash him on your bench. If there's any week that you're going to play him, it's going to be in this game that's supposed to be an absolute shootout. But I'm with you. There's just like this gut feeling. It's like as soon as you trust Hardman enough to put him in your lineup, seeing 17 targets over the last 2 weeks, you could just almost like expect him to put up a dud. And there's no analytics to back that up. But for people that have played fantasy football a long time, you just kind of know that that's how it goes. But Pat, I want to talk about somebody else on the Chiefs right now, and that's Daryl Williams, who kind of put together a performance last week that was what we have wanted to see from Clyde Edwards-Helaire for the last 2 years and have not seen. So I'm wondering, I think everybody was ranking Daryl Williams way too low last week. How high are you ranking him heading into this matchup?
I think I've got him running back 7 or running back 8. So pretty excited about him. Yeah. That's the funny thing. Like, we felt that Clyde Edwards-Helaire was losing touches to Daryl Williams in some key spots, the high value touches close to the goal line. And, when Clyde went out, we kind of wondered if it was going to be just, Daryl Williams, or is it going to be Jerick McKinnon sort of intruding on his workload? And really, it was just all Daryl last week. So, as the do everything back on an explosive, high scoring team like the Chiefs, like that's potentially really valuable. You've got like 2 or 3 touchdown upside, especially in a game like this where it's going to be just a track meet with the teams presumably going up and down the field. So, I mean, there's some really nice potential here. And I mean, like in DFS, he's definitely going to be in a couple of my lineups this week.
Yeah, as he should be. And it's got to be pretty concerning for those that have, invested a lot of draft capital into Clyde Edwards-Helaire, whether it be in redraft or dynasty, to see a veteran like this who hasn't really showed any pop throughout his career come in and just, outperform him in almost every single aspect. So you've got to wonder that even when Clyde Edwards-Helaire does come back, if his role is going to be limited now, and if Daryl Williams has done enough to carve out a role for himself for the rest of the season. But let's go to the other side of the ball now and talk about the Titans. We know that the Chiefs have been very, very beatable through the air. I mean, that's the way that you beat this team, is to throw on them. And after a pretty disappointing start to the season, A.J. Brown showed some flashes in the second half of Monday's game. So, Pat, I'll throw this question to you first, but what are you expecting from A.J. Brown this week? Do you think that he's going to be that wide receiver one we drafted him to be, or are you expecting another disappointing week?
I'm just taking the leap of faith off the cliff and believing that he is going to be back to wide receiver 1. And it was so weird in that game that, like, in the first half, he's got no target. Well, he might have had a target, but no catches. They're showing him on the sideline. He looks sick. Like, oh no, not this. And all of a sudden he shows up, and, sorry, he did, Victoria. I know that game didn't go quite the way you wanted it to, but yeah, I mean, he looked like vintage AJB in that second half. So, and especially now with Julio's hamstring flaring up again, I think they're going to lean on him pretty heavily in a great matchup against Kansas City. So I think you've just got to totally be confident in AJB this weekend.
I'm with you. I'm slotting him in my top 10 for this week. Victoria and I talked about this at length on yesterday's show, so I'll ask Victoria a different question. But yeah, I think that A.J. Brown is back. It was a weird circumstances to start off the season with a new offense and some injuries, but what we saw last week, they want to get him the ball. The question I have for you, though, Victoria, first of all, I want to preface this by saying, yes, it is foolish to fade Derrick Henry, but is this the game that we might want to temper expectations for? Just a little bit. I could see this being a game where the Chiefs go up really early, or go up big really early, and kind of force the ball into Ryan Tannehill's hands. So is this a week where you might, think about fading Derrick Henry a little bit?
Never, ever, ever fade the king, the RB1 on the season, getting a full 9 more points per game than the next best running back, Austin Eckler. Just How could you ever fade this man? I still think the Titans will run the ball even if they are down a couple scores. They constantly are using him. He is the focal point of their offense. There's no way I'm fading him. And he has a shot to get in the end zone every single week, and could be
every single play.
Exactly.
If we're being honest.
Listen, that's too soon. Okay, my heart is still hurting a little bit from this week's Bills game, but I digress.
Yeah, and I just read a stat this morning that absolutely blows my mind. Derrick Henry has more yards after contact than any other running back has rushing yards. That's it. He has more yards after contact than anybody else. I mean, that is absolutely mind-boggling to think about. The man is the definition of being built different. Let's go to another game, though, and this one has a ton of fantasy implications in it, and this is Pat's team as well. We're talking about the Washington football team playing in Green Bay. I think everybody's predicting the Packers to win this game. They're 9.5-point favorites. And I want to ask both of you this question because this is one that, I'm conflicted about, and I don't know the answer. So, Pat, if you want to start us off, Antonio Gibson has been kind of a disappointment this year, but the Packers defense has been Swiss cheese, pun very intended on that one. So if Gibson's able to suit up, do you see this as kind of a get right opportunity for him where he can finally live up to those offseason expectations?
Yeah, I mean, it could be if he were completely right physically, but he's got this hairline fracture in his tibia, his shin, and just like I'm worried about that. He was in and out of the game last week. I think it's going to ramp up the snaps for McKissick, and he could potentially do a lot on very few snaps. And I'm just kind of bummed that it's gone this way for Gibson because, not only is it the injury, but it's the fact that the Washington defense is so much more pathetic than we expected it to be. Like we thought this was a defense that people were targeting, like in team, leagues where you have to pick a team defense. People wanted Washington coming into this season. And it's just so bad. It's like putting them in situations where they're thrown into the McKissick game script instead of the Gibson game script. And so do we see that work out differently with the Washington football team, the worst defensive backfield in the NFL, stopping Aaron Rodgers and making this a run-friendly script for Gibson and Washington? I kind of think not. So I don't think this is really a get-right spot for Gibby this week, unfortunately.
Pat, I got to say, you just completely changed my opinion. I thought this was going to, but you make that such a good point there that this game is probably going to go in Gibson or in McKissick's favor. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, but I don't know if there was a bigger collective whiff by the fantasy football community than thinking that Washington was going to be a dominant defense this year. It is unbelievable. It kind of reminds me of Jacksonville. A few years back, they went to the AFC Championship game, had this great season, and then came out the next year and won 2 games. Defense was terrible, and that's kind of what Washington feels like. It seemed like they were so close to being there, and then have just completely fallen apart this year. Victoria, do you have anything to add to Antonio Gibson? Could you see this potentially working in his favor, or are you just kind of staying away at this point?
I think with all, again, as we mentioned, with all the injuries and bye week players, if you have to play him in a pinch, he could potentially, he has that big playability like we saw against Buffalo a couple of weeks ago. He's catching a swing pass for a 73-yard touchdown. I mean, he's got that ability, but with all the injuries, as Pat already mentioned, shoulder, the shin, I'm not confident in it. It's worth noting, too, I saw a report today that their offensive coordinator was saying they're just trying to manage his reps in practice during the week so he's good for game day, saying he won't be on a pitch count, which is very interesting, and I'm wondering if that's just to throw Green Bay off. Is this the
same guy who said he was going to have a Christian McCaffrey level workload in the offseason?
Exactly. That's why it's so hard to trust. So I'm saying if you have to throw him in, then you have to do what you got to do. But I'm with Pat as well. He explained it so very well. It's just it's likely not going to be the right game script for Gibson.
Let me just add the Washington football offensive coordinator to the list with Bruce Arians, Pete Carroll, and Zach Taylor as far as coaches that I don't trust whatsoever. But one question I have, and let's just put on our hypothetical hats for a minute and say that Washington goes out and upsets the Green Bay Packers this weekend. If Washington can beat the Green Bay Packers, Pat, I'll ask you first, do you think there might be some quarterback controversy when Ryan Fitzpatrick comes off of IR? Because Taylor Heineke has looked pretty serviceable, 2-3 right now. I think if he can get this team to 500 and, pull off a big upset win, Ryan Fitzpatrick's job could be in danger. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I think that is still very much to be determined, but distinct possibility that Heineke is playing for the starter role. I don't think he's playing necessarily to be the starter next year. I think Washington is going to be very much on the lookout for their quarterback of the future in their draft. But it is possible, though, I think that he could fend off Fitzmagic once he's back. But, if he does have a couple of dud games, and he was in kind of a smash spot last week against the Chiefs, and it didn't really happen for him. So we'll see. It's a nice setup for him this week with no Jair Alexander for the Packers, still no Zadarius Smith. But they've kind of been overachieving a little bit for as undermanned as they are. So we'll see. It's going to be kind of an interesting game. I'm probably going to take Washington. I think 9.5 points is too tall.
Yep. I'm with you. This game, something about this game just feels like there's a potential upset on the table. I'll be watching that one closely. Victoria, the question I have for you is about Aaron Jones. I was beating the drum for Aaron Jones with Jamal Williams gone and him taking on all of the passing down work. I thought that we were going to see a little bit more consistency from Aaron Jones this year. I had him as my RB3 in preseason rankings, but now 6 weeks into the season, it seems like Aaron Jones is still kind of a boomer bust running back. So this week against Washington, we know that they don't have a great defense. Are you predicting a boom or a bust week from Aaron Jones?
I think you see a boom week from Aaron Jones, and I think we see a boom week for all Packers. As we've already mentioned a few times here, the Washington defense has been atrocious on all levels through these first couple of weeks. They're allowing so many points to the running back position, wide receivers. I think Davante Adams as well is going to pop. Aaron Rodgers will have a great game. It's just, as Pat mentioned, I think that the 9 points is a little bit too much because their defense isn't the best either. But I think we see a nice game from Jones. Let me ask you this, Dave. How do you feel about A.J. Dillon coming onto the field? More often than not, I find myself having red zone on and being like, why is A.J. Dillon out there? Because I have Aaron Jones in a lot of spots. But he's been looking pretty good lately.
Yeah, he certainly has, and I mean there were no doubts about A.J. Dillon's talent. When I thought that Aaron Jones was going to be the one leaving Green Bay and Jamal Williams was going to be the one staying there, I was ready to put A.J. Dillon as an RB1 heading into this season. And what got me really excited for the first 3 weeks of the season was that Aaron Jones was seeing almost 100% of the red zone and goal line opportunities. That was my fear, was that A.J. Dillon was going to take away all of those valuable goal line touches, but Aaron Jones seemed to have done enough that he had the coach's trust to get those touches. But now, like you said, it seems like every single week, A.J. Dillon is just getting a bigger and bigger piece of the pie. So, I mean, obviously, I think you're still ranking Aaron Jones as a top 10 guy. But, the expectations that I had for him in the offseason was that he was going to finish somewhere between 1 and 5 overall. And I think with A.J. Dillon in there, cutting away from him, I think that does make it a little bit more difficult for him to have a finish like that. There's one more guy that I want to talk about on here. And Victoria, you just said that you're expecting smash games from Aaron Jones, Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers. One thing we haven't seen in Green Bay in a long, long time is a serviceable wide receiver too, but Allen Lazard has kind of very quietly become that guy. Through the first 3 games, he saw less than 70% of the team snaps, and over the last 3 weeks, he's now seen 79%, 86%, and 85% of the team snaps, including this nifty little shovel pass touchdown last weekend. So, Pat, is Allen Lazard the real deal? I mean, do we finally have a wide receiver 2 in Green Bay?
I don't think we do, Dave. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, when he comes back, he could eventually maybe be that guy. Although with Scantling, you're going to get the 1 catch for 5-yard games, and you're going to get the 2 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdown games. Yeah. It's just it's so. Davante dominates targets and air yards so much in this offense that it's just plus Rodgers is kind of resourceful. And if it's not Davante is the one guy he locks onto, and otherwise he'll, he's been thrown to Mercedes Lewis lately for some big gains. I just don't. Yeah. And I think with Lazard, the snap share might be a little misleading just because they like him on the field. He is maybe one of the best run blocking wide receivers in the NFL. He actually helps make their running game go on their outside runs. So I don't think you're ever going to be able to fully trust a number 2 receiver for Green Bay this year. But in a week like this, you might have to throw Lazard in there. You might not have any choice, but for the most part, you're just kind of praying if you do have to use a secondary receiver for the Packers.
Yeah, and you kind of stole my thunder there, Pat. That's exactly what I was going to get at. Is Alan Lazard, even when he's on the field a lot, I mean, this guy is basically a tight end's body that
Yep.
lines up out wide. He is a fantastic run blocker, and you'll see him all the time. It seems like every time Aaron Jones rips off a big touchdown, you see 30, 40 yards down the field, Alan Lazard is locked up on some defender, just
Yep.
shoving him out of bounds. I mean, he's phenomenal at what he does, and that's why he earns his snaps. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't really translate into too much fantasy football value. I got one more game I want to talk about this weekend, and then we will talk about this evening's game, and that is Chicago playing in Tampa Bay. As you can imagine, Bucks are 2-score favorites here. We got a pretty low over-under. But, Pat, the one guy that I want to ask you about is Khalil Herbert. He led the league in snap percentage last week among all running backs with 89%. Now we've got Damian Williams is questionable, has not left the COVID list yet. So if Damian Williams isn't a go for this week, are you confident starting Khalil Herbert even against this really stout Tampa Bay defense?
I would say not confident, but I probably will be starting him in a few spots since he is on several of my rosters, just because no one runs on Tampa Bay. That is the impregnable defensive line with Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh. You just can't run up the middle on them. It's hard to run wide on them because their linebackers pursue so well. They're giving up 2.7 yards per carry. Teams are basically throwing on them 75% of the time since you just can't run and teams kind of abandon it. Now that'll be interesting with the Bears because they've been trying to sort of hide fields, protect fields, have a run heavy attack, and then have him take deep shots. And he's had that deep average depth of target. I think the deepest in the league right now. Mm-hmm. So he's not really a dump it off to the backs kind of guy. I don't think we're going to see the Bears with a game plan like the Dolphins had 2 weeks ago where Myles Gaskin had 10 catches for 70 some yards. I'm worried. My expectations for Herbert are very modest this week. I'd be happy with 50 yards and a touchdown.
Right. And I'm with you. I think that, every team has kind of showed the blueprint is to beat them through the air. You talk about the long throws that Fields has. I don't know if you saw, it was after Fields' game against Detroit where he connected with Darnell Mooney on that really deep play. The Bears social media team put together this funny video where the ball comes out of Fields' hands, out of the stadium, wraps all the way around the earth, comes back into the stadium, and then hits Darnell Mooney 65 yards downfield. But that's what he's done, is hit these really deep passes, and that is the biggest weakness for Tampa Bay. So, Victoria, I got a question for you, and Pat already alluded to this. The way to beat Tampa Bay is through the air. So is this the game where you can maybe see Justin Fields crack into that QB1 territory?
I would love to see that. I want to see more opportunities for him in general, not only throwing the ball, but using his legs on the ground. I don't know why he hasn't, and it's certainly not enough for us fantasy managers, right? But just in general, that's another tool in his tool shed that they're not utilizing enough. I'd like to see that. Certainly with him throwing through the air this week, that's the only way they're going to have any shot. So with this bipocalypse we've already mentioned multiple times, people are going to be forced to start, obviously, Justin Fields, your Darnell Mooney's, your Allen Robinson. It's me. I'm the people. I am starting Allen Robinson again against my better judgment. And I just don't want to sit on the couch watching your Bears, Dave, and saying,
"Why did I do this to myself?"
Don't look at your app. Don't look at the points that they have. Don't even watch the game. I'm just kidding. But no, I mean, Tampa Bay is decimated on their secondary. They've got Sean Murphy Bunting down, Carlton Davis, Richard Sherman still on the mend. So Bears have an opportunity to throw. I don't think they're going to be able to pull it off, but Fields certainly has a wonderful shot at a QB1 game this week.
And I'll just slip it in there. Allen Robinson is one of my favorite DFS plays this week. He's seen an increase in targets for 3 straight weeks. It seems like Justin Fields is finally starting to develop a little bit more trust and confidence in him. So Allen Robinson is a guy right now who's being valued as like a wide receiver 3. I don't know if he's ever going to have, a 200 yard, 2 touchdown game with Fields, but I could see him having a pretty solid, I still like Allen Robinson. I think this is the week that he can get right a little bit. Now I got one question, and it seems really simple when I ask it. Now I want to ask both of you this one, and I'll start with you, Pat. But Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, who's the guy this week?
Oh, I'm Team Godwin. I'm almost always Team Godwin. And against the Bears, I think you want the slot man. Mm-hmm. You don't want the guy who's going up against Jalen Johnson. You want, the Bears have had trouble, I think, with slot receivers. So that's who you're targeting. Plus, I think Antonio Brown might have missed practice. He has some sort of ankle injury. I don't know what. Yeah, so Godwin for sure.
Yeah, and I think that Jalen Johnson, just being as like long and physical as he is, he matches up really well on Mike Evans. So I'm with you. I think if Antonio Brown plays, he's probably my favorite. But I think this is going to be one of those dud games from Mike Evans just because of Jalen Johnson, who is quietly becoming one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. Victoria, between these three, let's assume that Antonio Brown does play. Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, or Chris Godwin, who are you most confident in?
I do like AB more and more every single week. I just want to point out the Bucs targets between the wide receivers in the last 3 weeks, weeks 4 to 6. Antonio Brown leading with 32 targets, Evans with 24, Godwin with 21. So he's quietly becoming Tom Brady's favorite target. I don't know if it's because their sleepovers are really fun and they share their secrets, but whatever it is, it's working. And I would take AB. I love the argument though, Pat, on Godwin. I think I changed my mind there a little bit too. So hoping he has a good game as well.
Another mind-blowing stat with Antonio Brown. He has 8 touchdowns in his last 8 regular season games with the Bucs. So, I mean, Tom Brady definitely has started to fixate on him. And we are starting to see the old Antonio Brown that we weren't sure would ever come back. All right, last question I have about this game, and then we will get to tonight's game. And I can't believe I'm even asking this, but O.J. Howard kind of looked good last week. It seems like that Achilles injury is behind him. So, Victoria, are you confident plugging O.J. Howard in as a tight end streamer this week?
No, he has not had more than 4 fantasy points in the game this year. Besides that, his snap percentage obviously has gone up since week 3, but that's with Gronk being out. This is just a blip on the radar for me. I'd rather take a flyer on Zach Ertz if he's on your waiver wire. Still Mo Alley Cox this week. I'd just much rather have guys like that than OJ.
So Pat, let's imagine that Antonio Brown and Gronkowski, who are both out of practice today, let's imagine they do not play this week. Would you be confident in OJ Howard, or was last week just a complete anomaly that we should all forget about?
I'm kind of with Victoria. He burned me the year he came out, and I was all over him in dynasty drafts. So hard to get trust with him. And one of those catches last week was kind of like a design screen. I just don't know if he's got any sort of actual target juice besides from a couple of schemed up plays for him. So I think I've got him in the 20s at tight end this week, and that's in a 16 bye week. So
yeah, I'm just, I've got all of my dynasty rosters. I just want to feel comfortable finally taking him off the bench, but it's not easy. I'm starting guys like Anthony Ferkser over him this week. So that tells me all that I need to know. All right, now let's get to the juicy part of the show. We are talking about tonight's game that kicks off in just a few hours. Denver Broncos playing against the Cleveland Browns. And, I was actually looking for the line on this game, and it is different everywhere. I've seen it anywhere from 2 to 5 points. I don't think anybody really knows what to make of this game with all of the injuries to the Browns. They might be missing, they are missing their quarterback. They're missing their top 2 running backs. They might be missing their top 3 receivers. I mean, this is just crazy, crazy, crazy to see. But I think the one guy that everybody's going to be very focused on tonight is D'Ernest Johnson, who was the hottest waiver wire pickup of the week. But not only do they have injuries to their skill players, they also have injuries to their offensive line, and they have a really tough matchup where Von Miller said that he was going to kill the left tackle for the Cleveland Browns. So, Pat, are you buying into the D'Ernest Johnson hype, or where do you have him ranked this week?
By the way, I think Jedrick Wills is coming back. So that's going to be a tall order for Von Miller to kill Jedrick Wills because he's pretty tough. But I've got D'Ernest. I can't remember if I squeezed him in between the 2 Denver backs or if he is behind Melvin Gordon. I think those 3 are 21, 22, 23. So I'm not wildly confident. I think the Denver D is going to be smarting a little bit after kind of getting punked by the Raiders last week. And I just are we going to see we're probably not going to see a lot of Demetric Felton in the backfield, but are we going to see some John Kelly? Are we going to see Felton sort of, maybe we will see some of him in the backfield. I mean, he is a former running back. I know they've turned him into a wide receiver, but he was a running back at UCLA. So I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what that offense is going to look like. And the pedigree for Dearness is kind of questionable. He was never really a starter in college at South Florida. He backed up Marlon Mack for 3 years and then was kind of in a committee his senior year, and just like a limited track record in the NFL. So I did wind up picking him up in one league where I was just completely buy-torn and desperate. So I'm hoping he can do something, but I'm not wildly confident.
If that doesn't sum up week 7 right there, spend an entire minute talking about how terrible this guy is and what I picked him up and I'm starting him this week. So that's week 7 in a nutshell for you right there. But Victoria, I want to ask you about Donovan Peoples-Jones. And this is crazy because he's on a team with Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. So feel free to just completely laugh at me. But is it possible that Donovan Peoples-Jones becomes the wide receiver 1 on this team? I mean, all he has done for 2 straight years is make huge plays. And all Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham done is disappoint. So is it possible that he becomes the guy to own?
First of all, I want to preface this with you guys are getting me so excited for this game tonight. All this talk about all these fantastic standout players. I cannot wait. It's going to be juicy. Just kidding, obviously. Maybe for this week, Dave. Yeah, sure, he can be that wide receiver you want to own. But with Landry coming off IR this afternoon, having a shot to play tonight, and obviously in the foreseeable future, it'll likely be Landry. The thing of it is, this is always going to be a run-first team. I know, obviously, they're down their 2 most talented backs, so we'll see what their identity even looks like tonight, because are they going to know who they are without running the ball on the ground efficiently? It'll be very interesting. I definitely picked up Peoples-Jones in a couple of leagues over this last couple of weeks. He's had 6 targets, 5 targets the last 2 games, 78% of snaps in week 6. That's the highest since week 1 of this season. So the targets are there, but with Case Keenum at the helm tonight, I'm not sure.
Case Keenum, last time he looked good, it was with Kevin Stefanski. So I think there's a smidge of hope there. But yeah, it's pretty tough to get too excited about that. 2 more questions about this game, and these are both going to be about Denver Broncos. One of them is simple but not simple. Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon. These guys have been in a frustrating timeshare all year. Pat, who do you think has a bigger game tonight?
I'm going to say Javonte, even though I'm a Badger guy and was at the game where Melvin Gordon ran for 406 yards against Nebraska, but I can't go with Melvin over Javonte. Like, Javonte's been really exciting. It's a 50-50 between the two of them, but I do think Javonte's got a little more juice right now. He does seem to make just one extraordinary play a game, whether it's dragging Marlon Humphrey on his back like 25 yards a couple weeks ago, or there was another good one last week. So I'm going with Javonte over my man Melvin.
He's actually leading the league in carries of 30-plus yards, despite only getting about half of the team's snaps, which is crazy.
And I saw that with yards after contact, I think Henry is at 3.6 per carry, and Javonte is at 3.5. So that's the kind of impact he's having on his carries.
Yeah, with the trade deadline quickly approaching, guys that have Javonte Williams on their roster everywhere are crossing their fingers and hoping that Melvin Gordon gets moved somewhere, because that kid has looked really, really good. Now, the last question I have, and I'm going to ask both of you guys this, it's kind of a yes or no question here, but Cortland Sutton has seen 25 targets and a 31% target share over the last 2 weeks. It looked absolutely dominant. So, Victoria, yes or no, is Cortland Sutton a wide receiver 1?
On his team, yes. I think he's getting closer to allowing us to rank him as a wide receiver 1, depending on the matchup and this quarterback situation. You hope that Teddy stays at the helm here. Although he is fine with Drew Lock, but I mean, who really wants to watch that? No offense. He has his upcoming schedule, obviously Cleveland tonight, Washington, Dallas, Philly, the Chargers, Kansas City, Detroit. Most of those are pretty favorable matchups for the most part. The only concern is Jerry Jeudy coming back. He's been designated to come back off of IR to play. I don't think he's going to just jump back into that role he had in the first week. But Sutton's shown how he can be pretty capable of being that dominant wide receiver 1 for his team in this league. But it is what it is. There will be less targets to go around once Jeudy comes back. So that would be my only concern.
I've been beating the drum for Cortland Sutton all off season, so I love to see him getting it together. Pat, before we sign off here, quick yes or no. Is he a wide receiver 1 this week for you?
No, mid-range wide receiver too. That's more about Teddy though than about Sutton.
Yeah.
So
Totally understandable. Well, I want to thank both of you guys so much for coming on this show. Two of my favorite minds in the fantasy football space. Before we sign off here, Victoria, one more time, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you've got going on over at Football Guys and Ball Blast.
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at FFB_Victoria, hosting the Football Guys co-hosting, the Football Guys Mailbag Show every Wednesday at 7:30. Also, we have Ladies Night Out every Thursday night before Thursday Night Football with Kate and Michelle of Ball Blast. That's also at 7:30 Eastern. So just having a good old time this off season.
Victoria is all over the place. Follow her on Twitter and you'll see what she's up to. And then, Pat, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, where they can find the primer, and what else you are working on this season.
Yeah, on Twitter, you can get me at Fitz_FF. Find the primer and my rankings at fantasypros.com. My rankings are also at thefootballgirl.com and the Fitz on Fantasy podcast out every Tuesday morning.
Two of my favorite people in the space. Thank you so much for making the time today. Thank you to everybody that tuned in. I will see you next Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern as we discuss some Week 8 matchups. Have a great day.